Picture the platform at Grand Central Terminal. A red carpet rolled out, secretaries and barbers waiting on board, bankers and movie stars stepping on like it is the most important ride of their lives. This was the most famous train in the world. It is widely credited with inventing the phrase red carpet treatment. It ran for 65 years. Then, on a cold night in December 1967, it made its final run half empty, almost unnoticed. Everyone blames the airlines. That is not wrong. It is just too small. The real killer was hiding inside the railroad's own rescue plan. Here's the part that still bothers me. This train did not fade out slowly, the way old technology usually does. It went from cultural icon to quiet embarrassment in about a decade. And when it finally died, it did not die alone. It took its own railroad company down with it in what was, at the time, the largest corporate bankruptcy in American history. So yes, jets beat trains. That part of the story is true. But jets beat trains does not explain why the company that owned this legendary train made the exact decision that guaranteed it could not survive the fight. That decision is the real story. And almost nobody talks about it. Before any of that, you have to go back to something much smaller. In 1902, New York Central Railroad needed a way to beat its biggest rival, the Pennsylvania Railroad, on the run between New York and Chicago. Pennsylvania Railroad had its own prestige train coming, the Broadway Limited. New York Central's answer, launched on June 15, 1902, wasn't about luxury at first. It was about geography. New York Central's tracks ran along what railroaders called the water level route, a flatter, faster path through Albany, Buffalo, and Cleveland, while Pennsylvania Railroad had to fight the grades of the Allegheny Mountains. The original weapon of the 20th Century Limited wasn't glamour. It was physics. Flatter track, faster train, simple advantage. That matters, because everyone remembers this train as a glamour story. It wasn't, not originally. The velvet rope and the red carpet came later, layered on top of an operational edge that already worked. The identity people remember is not the identity that built the company. The luxury was marketing. The real business model was speed nobody else could match on that route. Sold to the exact people who valued minutes more than money. And in the early 20th century, that mattered enormously. If you were a banker, a lawyer, a studio executive, or anyone whose time was worth real money, rail was the only fast way to move between America's two biggest business centers. There was no interstate highway system. There was no commercial aviation to speak of. If you needed to be in Chicago for a 9 a.m. meeting and you were standing in Manhattan the night before, this train was the only realistic answer in the entire country. A flagship train wasn't just transportation. It was a proxy war between two railroad empires, fought in public, on a schedule, in front of the entire country, with every improvement announced like a headline. So New York Central leaned into it. In 1938, the railroad brought in industrial designer Henry Dreyfuss to redesign the whole train, streamlined Art Deco locomotives, redesigned interiors, a look so striking it made national news on its own. This is where the glamour actually starts. Onboard barbers, secretaries for hire, fine dining. The red carpet rolled out at every departure, a detail so famous that the phrase red carpet treatment is still widely credited to this exact train, even though most people using the phrase today have no idea where it came from. The train appears in Hitchcock's North by Northwest in 1959. It becomes the basis for a Broadway musical on the 20th century. World War II sends ridership climbing as troops and war industry travelers flood the rails, packing sleeper cars that used to be reserved for executives and studio heads. By the post-war years, this train isn't just a piece of railroad equipment. It's shorthand in American culture for arriving somewhere important. Executives timed their careers around getting invited to ride it. Newspapers covered its departures the way they'd cover a celebrity. For decades, this looks less like a train and more like an institution that could not be replaced. That's the part of the story people remember. Here's the part they usually skip. Even at its absolute peak, the 20th Century Limited's passenger service was not really standing on its own. Railroads in this era made their real money from freight. Passenger trains, even flagship ones with barbers and red carpets, were frequently subsidized by freight revenue rather than paying for themselves. The glamour was real. The profitability underneath it was already fragile. That's the first crack, and it opened years before a single jet ever competed for the route. The most famous train in America was, financially, closer to a marketing expense than most people assumed. This is where people get the timeline wrong. They assume the story is, train dominates for decades, then airlines show up in the 1960s and kill it. The truth is messier. Commercial jet service between New York and Chicago started arriving after World War II, and by the late 1950s, airlines like American, United, and TWA were offering something the railroads simply could not answer. The 20th Century Limited's signature run took about 16 hours. A jet did the same trip in under 2. That's not a competitive disadvantage. That's a different category of product. You can improve service, you can lower a fare, you cannot argue your way out of 14 hours. And the airlines knew exactly what they were selling. They weren't just faster. They were pitching the same executives who used to brag about riding the Century, telling them a new kind of status was available, one measured in hours saved instead of carpets rolled out. But speed alone doesn't explain everything either, because plenty of slower, older technologies survive by adapting or by being protected. This one wasn't. And that's where the pressure started stacking, one layer at a time. Start with the highways. From 1956 onward, the interstate highway system pulled short and mid-distance travelers away from railroads entirely, giving ordinary people a cheap, flexible alternative for trips that used to require a ticket and a schedule. Then there's the regulatory cage. The Interstate Commerce Commission controlled railroad rates, which sounds like a boring detail until you realize what it meant in practice. New York Central couldn't simply cut prices to compete, and it couldn't easily drop money-losing routes either. It was locked into a rate structure built for a different era, while airlines operated with far more pricing freedom. Add to that the loss of lucrative postal contracts, which had quietly subsidized passenger routes for years. Add fixed costs that don't care how many passengers show up. Crews still had to be paid, tracks still had to be maintained, terminals still had to be lit and staffed, whether the train ran full or half empty. So what did the railroad do? It cut back. Fewer sections of the train, reduced amenities, a slow erosion of exactly the experience that had justified the fare in the first place. Which sounds fine on paper. Cut costs to protect the business until you realize it starts a feedback loop. Less luxury means less reason to pay a premium fare, which means less revenue, which means more cuts, which means even less reason to ride it at all. The company was starving the exact thing that made people want to buy the ticket, to try to survive the thing that made the ticket unaffordable to sell. By the mid-1960s, New York Central and its old rival Pennsylvania Railroad were both bleeding from the same wounds. And here's the decision that turned a bad situation into a historic one. In 1968, the two railroads merged into Penn Central. On paper, it looked like survival math. Combine two struggling networks, cut overlapping costs, share infrastructure, and maybe outlast the pressure together. In practice, it fused two failing passenger operations and two corporate cultures that had spent 60 years trying to destroy each other. That was the railroad's answer to a crisis it didn't fully understand, and it did not work. The 20th Century Limited's final run happened just before all of this, on December 2nd and 3rd, 1967. Contemporary newspaper coverage described a train running on time, reduced in size, carrying a fraction of the crowd it once did, with barely the fanfare you'd expect for the death of something once called the most famous train in the world. No red carpet moment for the cameras, just a quieter departure than anyone who remembered its peak would have guessed. Then came the part nobody could outrun. The Penn Central merger finalized in 1968. 2 years later, on June 21st, 1970, Penn Central filed for bankruptcy. At the time, it was the largest corporate bankruptcy in American history. Read that again. The company, built by merging two of the most legendary railroads in the country, home to the train that invented the red carpet, collapsed within 2 years of trying to save itself. The rescue plan was the disaster. Separate what happened next into two different things, because they are not the same. In 1971, the federal government created Amtrak to take over intercity passenger rail nationwide, which meant the New York to Chicago route did survive, in a technical sense, as what's now called the Lakeshore Limited. In 1976, what remained of Penn Central's freight operations were folded into a new entity called Conrail. So something continued. The tracks are still there, a train still runs the route, but the thing that actually died wasn't the corridor. It was the identity. No barbers, no secretaries for hire, no red carpet, no status. A name that used to mean something now just means a route number on a national timetable. The brand of glamour rail travel didn't get acquired. It got erased, while a plain successor quietly inherited its rails. Behind every one of those numbers were people whose lives ran on this train's schedule. Railroad workers, from engineers to dining car staff to the onboard barbers and stenographers, held jobs in categories that simply stopped existing when service was gutted and Penn Central collapsed into bankruptcy restructuring. Those jobs didn't get automated or outsourced. They just stopped being needed all at once, along with the identity that had justified paying for them. Entire towns along the water level route had built local pride, and in some cases local economies, around being a stop on the most famous train in the world. When the flagship died and the network around it shrank, that status went with it, and so did some of the foot traffic, jobs, and reputation that came with being on the map of a legendary route. And there's a broader loss that's harder to put a number on. An entire ritual of American business travel, the overnight train with a barber and a dining car and a red carpet, replaced by a same-day flight with no ceremony attached to it at all. Faster, yes, but nobody rolls out a carpet for a boarding gate. Zoom out, and the pattern is bigger than one train. The 20th Century Limited didn't lose because people stopped wanting fast, comfortable travel between two major cities. They wanted that more than ever. It lost because its entire business was built on a foundation, freight-subsidized passenger service inside a rate-regulated industry that was never as solid as the red carpet made it look. When a genuinely faster option appeared, the cracks that had existed since 1902 became impossible to hide. The company's answer to that crisis, merging with its oldest rival, wasn't reckless on its face. It just combined two organizations that were both already too fragile to fix each other. That's not one villain. That's a chain reaction, years in the making, that finally had nowhere left to go. If your family ever caught this train out of Grand Central or LaSalle Street Station, or if you grew up near the water level route and remember when the schedules started shrinking, put it in the comments. Railroad histories capture the corporate side of this story well. They rarely capture what it felt like to actually watch the stop near your town go quiet, or to lose a job that only existed because that train existed. For a lot of these stories, the comment section really is the last archive. The red carpet still exists, rolled up somewhere in a warehouse or gone entirely, but the phrase never left. People still ask for the red carpet treatment today in hotels, at premieres, at airports, with no idea it came from a train that used to unroll one every single night at Grand Central, right up until the night it quietly stopped.